Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're asking a pretty fundamental question, isn't it? What is work?
Right. It sounds simple, but it's really not.
Especially when you think about, half the world's population. How does that answer change for women?
Hugely.
Yeah.
Because our standard idea of work, it often misses so much.
Exactly. For many of us, work means, I guess, paid jobs, office factory, something outside the home.
The traditional view, yeah.
But what if that's just too narrow, like seriously limited? What if it's ignoring this massive amount of effort and contribution and actual productivity?
The invisible work.
That's what this deep dive is all about, challenging those old ideas, especially when we look at women, particularly in the Indian context, and all the stuff they do that often just goes unacknowledged.
And undervalued.
Totally. We've got a bunch of academic texts, some official reports, too, that really get into this. It's complex.
It really is.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because honestly, what we're about to explore might just change how you see work forever.
Yeah.
Especially women's incredible contributions.
Let's do it.
So, when we talk about work, the common idea, like we said, usually focuses on the paid stuff, right?
The job.
The salary.
But get this statistic from the United Nations. It might genuinely make you pause. Globally, women are half the population.
Okay.
But they perform 2/3 of the world's work. 2/3.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot more than half.
Right. But despite all that effort, they earn only 1/10 of the world's income.
1/10.
And own just 1/100th of its property.
Gosh, that's not just a gap, that's a chasm.
Exactly. It's a huge sign that so much work just isn't being counted or valued, not in our usual economic thinking.
That UN statistic is incredibly powerful, isn't it? And what's fascinating, or maybe frustrating, is how the very definition of a worker has actually shifted over the decades. Here in India, in the official records like the census and the NSSO.
The National Sample Survey Organization, right?
Exactly. These changes, sometimes they seem small, but they've had a massive impact on how women's work gets recorded. Or, more often, how it doesn't. Okay, so how did it change?
Well, take the 1951 census. Back then, it was pretty much about income. Were you self-supporting or an earning dependent?
So, if you brought money in, you counted. Simple enough.
You'd think so. But then, 1961, they switched it up. The focus moved to the duration of work, whether it was paid or not.
So, including unpaid work, too.
Yes. And guess what? Suddenly, there was this huge surge in the number of women counted as workers.
Okay, that sounds like progress, finally seeing the bigger picture.
It looked that way for a moment. But then came 1971, and this is crucial. The census defined a worker as someone whose main activity was productive work.
Main activity, okay.
And here's the kicker. Domestic work, housework, childcare. That was automatically put in the non-worker category.
Wait, automatically? So even if a woman was, say, working hours on the family farm, or maybe weaving at home for sale, if her main role was seen as housewife, she just didn't count.
Pretty much. She vanished from the worker stats. Even with all that other productive work, it was this deep conceptual bias, and the number of women workers reported just plummeted.
Wow. Millions of women contributing so much just made statistically invisible overnight.
Exactly. It wasn't just a number change. It felt like a statement that their work didn't matter economically.
Yeah. That's astonishing, devalued by definition.
Precisely. Now, to be fair, from 1981 onwards, they tried to fix it a bit. They brought in the idea of marginal workers.
Marginal workers, meaning
people who worked for less than, say, 6 months in the year. This allowed more women, especially those doing seasonal or part-time work alongside home duties, to be counted again.
So an improvement, but still not capturing everything.
Still not fully. That bias against unpaid family work, it lingered. A lot of women's efforts were still really undervalued in the official figures.
And it's not just the census, is it? You mentioned the NSO.
Yeah.
Even their modern ways of classifying workers like self-employed, irregular salaried, casual labor. They sometimes get it wrong for women, too.
Absolutely. Think about women doing piece rate work at home, like rolling beatus, those traditional cigarettes?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
They get paid per 1,000 beatus rolled. They might be officially labeled self-employed.
But they're not really running their own business, are they?
Not usually, no. They're often working for someone, an entrepreneur or a contractor, just getting paid per piece. They don't have the control or security of being truly self-employed. And even the NSSO's more detailed surveys with different time frames struggle to properly capture work that's very intermittent or done for just short bursts, which is often how women have to fit it in around everything else.
So the systems themselves aren't quite designed to see it.
If we zoom out a bit, look internationally. Organizations like the ILO, the International Labor Organization, they've been pushing for this broader idea called decent work.
Decent work. Okay, what does that involve?
Well, it's not just about having a job, any job. It's about productive work, yes, but done in conditions of, freedom, fairness, security, and basic human dignity.
Sounds like a much higher bar.
It is. It also includes fair income, crucially, social protection, things like pensions, healthcare, and equal opportunities for everyone. This bigger picture really shows how narrow our old definitions have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's where it gets, I think, really interesting and maybe hits close to home for a lot of people listening. Women's lives, they're so often deeply tied to the household, aren't they? Which leads to this thing called the double burden.
Ah, yes, the double burden, or sometimes even triple.
What is that? Exactly. It relates to this idea of the sexual division of labor, right? Where society traditionally assigns men to the public sphere, paid work, out there.
The breadwinner role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And women are often expected to manage the private sphere, the home, the kids, the family care.
Primarily, yeah.
So imagine someone asks you, what do you do? If your answer is, well, I manage the house, I cook, I clean, I look after the children, maybe my elderly parents, often that's not seen as work in the same way, is it?
No, it's often dismissed or just expected.
But it's incredibly demanding. It's constant. It's essential for everyone's well-being. But it doesn't come with a paycheck, usually.
It's a critical point. Women do such a huge range of work. Some is productive, some maybe less so by economic standards. Some is visible, a lot is invisible. Paid, unpaid, economically productive, socially productive.
So many categories.
Let's try to simplify. There's unpaid S&A work. S&A is the UN system of national accounts, the framework countries use for GDP and stuff.
Okay.
So S&A work includes things like growing food for your own family to eat, or collecting firewood or water. These could be bought or sold, so they technically fit within the economic boundary, but they often go unpaid and uncounted when done within the household.
Right, subsistence activity.
Exactly. Then there's unpaid non-S&A work. This is completely outside that economic boundary. Things like managing the household, cooking meals for the family, cleaning, caring for children or the elderly, maybe volunteering in the community.
All the stuff that makes society actually function day to day.
Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
But it doesn't show up in the GDP figures at all.
So it's about how we classify it and whether we attach an economic value.
Precisely. There's a helpful concept here called the third-person criteria. Came from an economist named Margaret Reed.
Third-person criteria.
The logic is simple. If an activity could, in theory, be done by someone else for like cooking, cleaning, childcare, then it's productive work.
Ah, because you could hire someone.
Exactly. If it can't be delegated like eating or sleeping, then it's personal consumption, not work.
Yeah.
This really helps us argue that housework is productive, it has economic value, even if unpaid.
That makes sense. And that leads us straight to the idea of the care economy, doesn't it?
The care economy.
This sort of hidden sphere where the workforce itself is, well, reproduced and maintained. All that crucial, mostly unpaid stuff. Cooking, cleaning, caring for family, babies, elders, the sick. It's the bedrock, but invisible on the spreadsheets.
It is. And it's not like this is a new idea. Way back in 1975, here in India, the Committee on the Status of Women,
The CSWI.
yes, in their big Towards Equality report, they actually suggested recognizing the economic value of housework and providing rights for domestic workers. We were talking about this decades ago.
Wow, 1975. That's quite early, really.
It is. And now, finally, things like time use surveys. India did a pioneering one back in 1998-99. They're trying to actually measure this invisible work, asking people how they spend every hour of their day.
To make it visible, finally.
But this invisibility, it's like a double whammy for women, isn't it?
How so?
Well, first, it leads to their marginalization, lower status. If your huge contribution isn't seen or counted, it's easier for your voice not to be heard, your needs not met.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind.
And second, it messes up policymaking. If you don't have accurate data on what women are actually doing, how can you design effective economic or social policies? Their contributions just aren't factored in properly.
So why does it stay invisible, this statistical invisibility?
There are a few key reasons, really. Cultural bias is a big one. Sometimes the typically male head of the household might just underreport what the women are doing, especially if it's informal or home-based. Maybe doesn't see it as real work.
Or maybe doesn't want to admit dependence on it?
Could be. Then there's interviewer bias or just badly designed questionnaires that don't ask the right questions in the right way. And sometimes the sheer amount of domestic work a woman does just overshadows everything else she might also be doing, farming, craft work, whatever.
It becomes the default label.
Exactly. And of course, anything that isn't bought or sold, any non-monetized production, often just gets missed.
Okay, so that's the unpaid side. But what happens when women do enter the paid workforce? Does it suddenly become a level playing field?
Well, the data suggests otherwise, unfortunately. The labor market in India, it's heavily segmented.
Segmented, meaning?
Meaning men and women tend to be concentrated in different types of jobs, and guess where women often end up?
Let me guess. Lower paying, less secure jobs.
You got it. Think about this. Back in 2001, almost 95% of female workers were in the unorganized sector,
95, that's nearly everyone.
compared to about 89% for men. Still high for men, but a noticeable difference. And women made up over 60% of those marginal workers we talked about, the ones working less than half the year.
So segmentation means women are clustered in jobs that are often informal, low paid, no benefits, no security, often jobs that kind of mirror traditional roles maybe, like care work, cleaning, textile.
Often, yes. Low-skilled, low-status jobs predominantly.
What causes this? Why are women funneled into these sectors?
It's complex. You have factors on the demand side, that's the employer's perspective, and the supply side, women's own situations and constraints.
Okay, let's start with demand. Why might employers prefer men or only offer women certain types of jobs?
Well, there's often this outdated view that women's earnings are just secondary income for the family, not essential.
So maybe they feel they can pay them less.
That definitely happens. Then there are those pervasive patriarchal attitudes. Assumptions that women won't be as committed or might leave to have children or won't be as regular at work. Often totally unfounded, but the bias exists.
Right, stereotypes.
Sometimes even modernization, bringing in new machines or techniques, can end up pushing women out and replacing them with men, especially if the training goes to men first.
Oh, interesting. So progress isn't always progress for everyone.
And ironically, sometimes laws meant to protect women, like mandatory maternity benefits or providing crutches at workplaces. Some employers see these as extra costs, which might make them hesitant to hire women, especially for formal, permanent roles.
That's the catch-22 you mentioned earlier, protective laws potentially leading to discrimination.
Exactly. It's a real challenge.
Okay, so that's the demand side. What about the supply side? What factors related to women themselves or their circumstances push them towards these informal, lower-paid jobs?
Well, those same patriarchal attitudes play a huge role here, too. Girls might not get the same chances in education, or they might be pushed towards subjects considered more feminine.
Limiting their career options right from the start.
Absolutely. And then there's the big one, the primary responsibility for home and childcare. This often means women feel they have to choose jobs with more flexibility, maybe closer to home, even if they pay less. They might pass up promotions if it means relocating or working longer, less predictable hours.
The double burden again,
Yeah.
constraining choices in the paid sphere.
Yes. And another thing, it's often really hard for women, with all those demands on their time, to join and actively participate in trade unions.
So less bargaining power.
Much less. If you can't attend meetings, can't take on leadership roles, your ability to negotiate for better wages or conditions is seriously weakened.
And that leads us straight to wage gaps, doesn't it?
Mm.
The wage differentials. Women getting paid less than men, sometimes for the exact same job.
It's stark. That beedi rolling example you brought up from West Bengal, it's just shocking. Women rolling beedis at home, often in poor conditions, getting maybe Rs 3 per thousand.
That'd be rupees.
While men doing similar work, but in a factory setting, might get Rs 10, plus allowances and maybe some benefits. And the women at home, often zero labor law protection.
That's blatant discrimination.
Absolutely. And it's not just extreme examples. NSSO data from the mid-90s showed significant gaps across the board. Women earned about 91% of male wages in agriculture, closer, but still a gap. But in services, only 64%.
Wow, much bigger gap there.
Even in professions where you'd think education would level things.
Mm.
Teaching, for example. Women teachers with the same qualifications earned only about 71% of what male teachers earned. Clerical jobs, around 87%. The gap persists everywhere.
So even when women are in the paid workforce, they face segmentation and lower pay.
And connecting this to globalization is also quite revealing. More foreign direct investment, FDI, coming in. It can create jobs for women, absolutely. Often in manufacturing, textiles, electronics assembly.
Okay, so that's a positive.
It can be. But it also puts downward pressure on wages. Companies can, and sometimes do, threaten to move production to another country if labor costs rise. This global competition can keep wages low, especially for workers seen as easily replaceable, which often includes women in lower-skilled roles.
So more jobs, maybe, but not necessarily better quality jobs or fair wages.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, in some developed countries, researchers found the gender wage gap narrowed partly because men's real wages actually fell or stagnated due to globalization and deindustrialization.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't women catching up entirely, but men falling back? A sort of downward harmonization?
Precisely. Not exactly the kind of equality we're aiming for, is it?
No, definitely not. Okay, so we've laid out the problems pretty clearly, the invisibility, the segmentation, the wage gaps. What does this all mean for us going forward? What can actually be done to value women's work properly?
Well, the first step, clearly, is making all this work visible. You can't value what you don't count. It's crucial for women's rights, for their empowerment, but also just for getting an accurate picture of the national economy. If you're ignoring half the work, your GDP figures are fundamentally flawed.
So how do we make it visible?
Feminist economists have been arguing for this for decades. We need a more holistic definition of work,
Holistic.
meaning broadening the official categories, including occupations specific to women that might currently be missed, accounting for work that's cultural or seasonal or specific to certain regions. And the big one, finding ways to estimate the value of unpaid work, maybe based on the time spent or what it would cost to pay someone else to do it.
Putting a number on the invisible.
Yes. And international groups like the ILO, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, they are working on revising classifications and guidelines to try and capture this better. Progress is slow, but it's happening.
Okay, so better definitions, better data. What about tackling the segmentation and the wage gaps on the ground here in India? What are the practical steps?
It has to start with tackling those deep-rooted patriarchal attitudes, doesn't it?
For sure. And that's not just men, right? Women sometimes internalize these biases too.
Absolutely. It's about everyone unlearning these assumptions about what work is valuable, who should do what. Then we need government policies that are actively gender inclusive. Advocacy to fight the misconceptions about women's commitment or capabilities.
Promoting positive role models, maybe.
Yes. And crucially, investing in girls' formal education, providing real incentives, support, maybe even quotas for a time, to encourage women to train for and enter fields traditionally dominated by men, engineering, IT, management.
Breaking down those occupational barriers.
Exactly. And we absolutely cannot ignore the support systems. Childcare is massive.
Affordable, accessible, quality childcare.
Yes. And proper maternity leave, paternity leave too. The argument should be that the state, society as a whole, benefits from women's participation, so the state should help shoulder these costs, not leave it solely on employers, which, as we saw, can backfire.
Make it easier for women to stay in the formal sector after having children.
And, of course, just strictly enforce the laws we already have, like the Equal Remuneration Act. It exists, but enforcement is often weak.
Right. Laws are only as good as their implementation.
And thinking even bigger picture, public investment in infrastructure plays a huge role, especially in tackling time poverty.
Time poverty, the lack of time due to all the unpaid work.
Exactly. Think about it. If you provide reliable nearby water supply, women don't spend hours fetching water. Better roads and transport mean less time traveling. Separate, safe toilets in schools mean girls are more likely to attend regularly.
So these basic infrastructure improvements directly reduce the burden of unpaid work on women.
Significantly, they free up women's time. Now, that time could potentially be used for education or for paid market work.
Could be. Doesn't automatically mean it will be, though.
That's the critical link. Time poverty definitely impacts income poverty. So poverty alleviation policies must consider how women use their time. Infrastructure is essential, but it needs to be paired with things like employment guarantee schemes, skills training, access to credit, things that actually help women translate that freed up time into decent paid work. It's a package deal.
Okay, so wrapping this up today, we've really unpacked how the way we even define work has historically just missed or dismissed the huge contributions of women, especially here in India.
From those shifting census definitions making women invisible to the massive undervalued care economy and then the biases and barriers faced even in the paid workforce.
Yeah, the segmentation, the pay gaps. It's clear that our traditional economic view has been seriously incomplete, like looking at the world with one eye closed.
And as we've discussed, seeing and valuing all the work women do, paid, unpaid, The productive stuff, the reproductive and care work, it's not just about fairness or women's rights, though that's crucial. It's fundamental for understanding our actual economy, for building a stronger, more equitable society.
We really can't have a healthy economy if we're ignoring or undervaluing the work of half the population.
It just doesn't add up.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Next time you think about the economy or the workforce, maybe just pause. Think about all that invisible work humming along beneath the surface all around you, and ask yourself, what more could we achieve as individuals, as a society, if all that work was truly seen, truly valued, and truly supported?
Something to mull over.
Definitely something to mull over, don't you think?